Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show, brought to you by Tissot, the official timing partners of the Tour de France. This week, Tadej Pogačar has asserted his dominance at the Tour de France on GC, but he can be beaten. We'll be talking about how. On the other hand, it's going to be very hard to beat Annemiek van Vleuten at the Tour de France Femme. We'll look back at how she dominated the Giro Donne. First up, the Tour de France. With back-to-back wins on stages 6 and 7 of the race, Tadej Pogačar put himself into a commanding position on GC, underlining his versatility and ability to seemingly do it all. He outsprinted Michael Matthews one day and overhauled Jonas Vingegaard on La Super Planche de Belfi the next. It left many onlookers feeling like the end result is inevitable. Pogačar will sail to a third straight Tour de France victory with ease. Now, that might be the case, but this race is not a done deal, not by any stretch of the imagination. Let's start by looking at the general classification after 9 stages of the race. Tadej Pogačar leads by 39 seconds over Jonas Vingegaard. Geraint Thomas is third at 1 minute 17 seconds, and there are 3 Ineos Grenadier riders in the top 7, with Yates in 4th, Pidcock in 7th, in 5th and 6th are the French pairing of Gaudu and Bardet, whilst Mas, Paulus and Quintana round out the top 10. Just outside it is Primož Roglič, who, despite conceding a lot of time on the cobbles after stage 5 after a crash, remains a threat, even at 2 minutes and 52 seconds. That might sound far-fetched, but if we look back to the GC last year after 9 stages, you will see a big difference. Pogačar led Ben O'Connor by 2 minutes 18, after the Australian had taken time back in a breakaway. The rest of Pogačar's GC rivals were all at least 5 minutes down, with 10th place David Gaudu a full 7 minutes and 22 seconds behind. Not only are the gaps on GC much closer this year, there are also teams with multiple cards to play. Ineos still have those 3 riders up there on GC, even with Martinez losing over 16 minutes yesterday, whilst Jumbo-Visma have Vingegaard in 2nd and Primož Roglič lurking in 11th. Further to that, both Jumbo-Visma and Ineos Grenadiers have managed to get through relatively unscathed, with all 8 riders from both teams still in the race. On the other hand, UAE team Emirates lost Vergaard Stake-Langen through a positive test for COVID, meaning that Pogačar has 1 less rider to help him defend the yellow jersey. He's also asked a lot of his team already, making them pace hard en route to La Planche de Belfi, and again yesterday when, in my mind, they used up far more energy than they needed to when there was little to gain or lose on the day. There's also the fact that we are yet to get on the real high mountains. La Super Planche de Belfi is only a relatively short effort at low altitude, and the times where Pogačar has shown a rare moment of weakness over the last 2 editions have been on high altitude days with back-to-back climbs. Vingegaard managed to drop Pogačar on the 2nd ascent of Mont Ventoux last year, whilst in 2020, both Lopez and Roglič put time into him on the highest summit finish of the race, the Col de la Loze. Yes, Pogačar is now stronger 2 years later and more experienced than he was back then, but he has shown signs of being human in the past. His rivals will definitely have that in their minds on today's rest day, ahead of 2 stages this week that climb above 2,600 metres above sea level. If you put all of that together, a slightly weaker team, a propensity to suffer more and longer, high altitude climbs in the heat, and 2 teams with cards to play, we most definitely have a big fight on our hands for the final 12 stages of the race. Although you might well disagree and think that Pogačar has this race sewn up already, you can let us know in the comment section below. Do you think he'll win again this year, or is somebody else the favourite to win the race? In the green jersey competition, things are much more clear-cut, with Van Aert firmly in control. With a second win added to 3 second places and consistent performances at almost every intermediate sprint, he now has a lead of 135 points over Fabio Jakobsen. It's not a mathematically unassailable lead, but at the same time, it's far-fetched to think that anyone can overhaul him in that competition. He has been nothing short of unbelievable in this race. I dare say that Quinn Simmons has some stories to tell about his time with him in a 2-up breakaway on stage 6, as well as the 30 people who blew up trying to chase him down. Magnus Cort Nielsen's reign in the polka dot jersey came to an end yesterday. That competition has a long way still to go though. Contrary to that, the young rider's jersey seems a dead cert. Tom Pidcock has been wearing it on Pogačar's behalf, but is now 1 minute 46 behind him in that competition. The scary thing is that Pogačar is still eligible for the Best Young Riders competition for 2 more years, which is bonkers. Although someone made a good suggestion during the race that instead of changing the age limit of that classification, you just make a rule that you're only able to win it once. I could get behind that. A little more on Bob's Youngles though. What a ride he did yesterday. Away in a very strong breakaway group, he went clear from them solo with over 60 kilometres to go. Initially I thought he had a cat's chance in hell of pulling off a stage win, but I'm glad he proved me wrong. It was close, with Thibaut Pinot slashing his advantage in half and then in half again, but the man from Luxembourg had just enough left in the tank to cling on. Outside of his national championships, that was his first win since Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne in 2019, 1,225 days previous. It's been a long road to recovery for him after injuries and operations, so few would have begrudged him the win, were it not for the fact that it was the fans' favourite Pinot behind him. If it's any consolation for Pinot, it did at least prove to us and to him that he's got the form he needs to win a stage of the race this year. There was also heartbreak for Jonathan Castroviejo of Ineos Grenadiers, who would end up second on the day. This is a man who spends the vast majority of his working life at the service of other riders. He's never won a pro race outside of time trials and prologues, but that's cycling. Unfortunately, only one rider can cross the line first. Just before we finish with the Tour de France for this week's show, keep your fingers crossed that we don't have any major disappointments tomorrow. The entire peloton and everyone working on the race had a PCR test last night, so let's hope there are no positives. That may be a forlorn hope though, since we've already seen Stekelangen and Bouchard go home due to COVID, as well as a few members of staff from other teams. If there's one thing we don't want, it's a potentially great race ruined by illness. A couple of stats before we move on from the Tour de France. Wout van Aert has finished in the top two at 56% of the stages we've had so far. 3 seconds, 2 firsts, just underline how superior he is on his current form. Tadej Pogačar, in winning on stage 7, has now won more Tour de France stages than 4-time winner Chris Froome. By the time he was Pogačar's age, Eddy Merckx had won 0 Tour de France stages, although that can be partly explained by the fact he didn't ride the Tour de France until he was 24. Stats that may be meaningless, but I think they do highlight how special what we are witnessing at the moment really is. On to Giro Donne now, and as I said in the intro, it was all about Annemiek van Vleuten. Her target this year was to do the Giro Tour double, and she's now halfway to that goal. She took the lead of the race on stage 4 last Tuesday, on a day that few people thought that would have a significant impact on the general classification. She'd gone clear with Mavi Garcia and Marta Cavalli, but the Italian was distanced on the run into the finish. And then Van Vleuten had little difficulty getting the better of Garcia at the finish after they'd been taking chunks out of each other for the previous few kilometres. That marked her 12th stage win at the race, and there would be more to come later. Elisa Balsamo took her second win of the race the following day into Reggio Emilia, getting the better of Charlotte Kool and Marianne Vos in the sprint. But Vos was back to her winning ways on stage 6 into Bergamo. Van Vleuten was uncharacteristically on the back foot that day, with Mavi Garcia on the march, with Vos and Longo Borghini and Van Vleuten held up behind a crash. She put in a big chase though, and then brought them back by the finish. What about Vos though? 240 wins just on the road, not including cyclocross or any other discipline. And like Van Vleuten, she's showing no signs of slowing down. It would be so fitting to see her win a stage or more at the inaugural Tour de France Femme later this month, and few would bet against it happening. After that, we went on to 3 back-to-back days in the mountains. The first of those, which finished atop Passo Maniva, saw the first breakaway success of the race. Amongst those up the road were Team DSM's Juliette Lebeau, who was in a class of her own when it came to that final climb. She was the only rider to stay clear of the main contenders behind, taking the biggest win of her career so far. Behind her, it was Van Vleuten who was the best of the rest, putting a further 6 seconds into Mavi Garcia when the bonus seconds were taken into account. There was still hope for Garcia though, with just 31 seconds separating her from Van Vleuten. But all those hopes were dashed on stage 7. Van Vleuten went on the attack early, with only Cavalli and Garcia initially able to follow. They too were eventually distanced, and Van Vleuten bridged up to the lone leader Christian Faulkner. Soon she was solo, and the only thing that came between her and victory was this crash.
Oh, no. Annemiek van Vleuten's gone down here.
Thankfully, on this occasion, she bounced back up and would eventually come to the finish with an advantage of almost a minute to Cavalli and 3 to Garcia, who cracked and finished in 6th place. It meant that Van Vleuten went into the tough final stage with a comfortable 2-minute buffer over Cavalli. That buffer was reduced on the penultimate stage of the race though, albeit not significantly. At the front of the race, Christian Faulkner of Team Bike Exchange was cementing her newfound reputation as one of the strongest riders in the current peloton. She shot up the road in a breakaway on the first climb of the day and racked up enough points throughout the day to take the lead and ultimately win the Queen of the Mountains competition. On top of that, she was strong enough to hold everyone at bay to take her second stage win of the race. She worked hard for that though. She was absolutely exhausted by the time she crossed the line. Behind her, Marta Cavalli had dropped Van Vleuten on the descent to pull some time back, whilst Garcia was desperately chasing behind to defend her 3rd place on GC. She did, just, but ended the race over 6 minutes down on Van Vleuten with Cavalli in 2nd. The 10th and final stage was almost certain to end up in a bunch sprint, and that's exactly what we had. Chiara Consoni managed to get around compatriot Rachel Barbieri before the line to take her first ever win at the race. So Van Vleuten has wrapped up her 3rd overall win at the race, and it's hard to see how anyone is going to beat her at the Tour de France Femme. That said, descending really does seem to be her weak point, so perhaps that is something that the other riders can try to exploit. We don't have long to wait now. The race starts in just under 2 weeks' time. Van Vleuten also won the points competition, whilst Niamh Fisher-Black took the Best Young Riders classification with 5th on GC. In terms of what's coming up on GCN+, it's not just about the Tour de France. We have daily highlights of the Balois Ladies Tour from Wednesday through to Sunday, which will get uploaded for you as soon as we possibly can each day. Lorena Wiebes, Elena Van Dijk, Pfeiffer Georgi and Audrey Cordon-Rago are amongst the big stars competing there in Belgium, which kicks off with a prologue on Wednesday. I wouldn't be surprised to see Wiebes add another few wins to the 11 she has already racked up this year. You'll be able to watch those highlights in all GCN+ territories. Meanwhile, the Tour de France resumes tomorrow with a summit finish on Megève. On Wednesday, they climb to the highest point of this year's race, the Galibier, over 2,600 metres above sea level, before another summit finish on the Col de Granon. But if there's one stage you have to watch from start to finish, it's Thursdays. Stage 12 is the Queen stage of this year's race, going back over the Galibier from the start before tackling the Col de la Croix de Fer, or 29 kilometres of it, and finishing up Alpe d'Huez. It's the same route that the Étape de Tours tackled yesterday, where our very own Killian Kelly took part. We won't give away too much, but here's a quick excerpt.
So I've 1 kilometre to go to the top of the Croix de Fer, and Jesus, the heat is just, I mean, it's not even as hot as I thought it was going to be, and it's still just really stifling. But I had a moment I knew I was going to have at the bottom of the Croix de Fer, kind of a third of the way through, and it gets really steep, and it's 12-13%, and it was at like the top of the day where the sun was at its worst, and I was like, I'm going to have to call it as and say, I can't do this. I'll never get to the top.
In all fairness to Killian, the pros won't be finding it that much easier. It really is a brutal stage. Being Bastille Day though, it's going to be a big party for everyone who isn't racing. Our coverage of that stage will start with the breakaway from 11:45 BST, 12:45 CEST. Territory restrictions apply, so please check if it's available where you are. We will also have the world of cycling coming out for you today on GCN+, with guest Danny Christmas and myself giving insights into the Giro Donne and Tour de France, as well as looking ahead to what's to come this week. And beyond all of that, our documentary this week is the latest in our Legends series. This time it's Thomas Voeckler, the legendary French rider who animated our screens almost constantly during his 17-year career as a pro. It will be released tomorrow on GCN+. Here's a quick trailer for you.
Il a eu la douleur de perdre son père juste avant ses 13 ans.
J'avais une telle douleur que j'arrivais pas à exprimer et ma thérapie, ça a été justement le vélo.
Right, that's all for this week's Racing News Show. Don't forget to tune back in to GCN Plus tomorrow as the Tour de France resumes with Stage 10. See you soon. Bye for now.